In a sport ruled by Bigfoot and big budgets, Dennis Anderson showed up with a beat-up mud truck and drove like he had nothing to lose. And somehow, that was enough to change Monster Jam forever. The legend of Gravedigger didn't start with glory. It started with odds stacked a mile high. Dennis Montague Anderson was born October 24, 1960, in Norfolk, Virginia. Though he would later make his home in Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina, that coastal region shaped his early grit and determination. He grew up in a working-class environment, around tools, engines, and the kind of mechanical tinkering you'd expect from someone destined for motorsports. From a young age, he was drawn to machines, not just to drive them, but to take them apart, rebuild them, push them. At the time, the undisputed king of monster trucks was Bigfoot, the polished blue Ford built by Bob Chandler. Bigfoot wasn't just a truck, it was the truck, the corporate-backed giant that defined the sport. Nobody expected a scrappy, underfunded rig like Gravedigger to stand a chance against it. But in 1988, on national television, Dennis Anderson shocked the world by beating Bigfoot in St. Paul, Minnesota. That victory over Bigfoot in St. Paul wasn't just a race, it was a cultural moment. Bigfoot was the polished, corporate-backed face of monster trucks, a machine that looked untouchable. Gravedigger was its opposite. Raw, patched together, driven by a man with nothing to lose. When Dennis crossed the line first, fans erupted because they saw something bigger than a race. They saw proof that an underdog could take down a giant, but that victory came at a price. Dennis wasn't rolling in sponsor money. Behind the cheers, he was broke, pawning parts, selling vehicles, and borrowing tools to keep Gravedigger running. More than once, he admitted he wasn't sure if he could afford to make it to the next show. And yet, every time he found a way. That struggle, the sense that Gravedigger was always one crash away from disappearing, only made fans love him more. By the early 1980s, Dennis had begun experimenting with mud-bogging and tractor-pulling events. It was in those muddy fields and backroads competitions that his reputation for bold, no-holds-barred driving began to germinate. In 1982, Anderson built the first Gravedigger truck, not originally a monster truck, but more as a modified drag mud machine. The body started life as an old red pickup, reportedly a 1951 Ford, and he spray-painted the name Gravedigger in primer. At first, it lacked flashy design or corporate backing. It was raw, rough, and dangerous, and that rawness became its brand. Gravedigger didn't roll out of a high-tech shop with corporate money behind it. It was born in a backyard garage in North Carolina, pieced together from junkyard scraps and grit. Dennis wasn't a professional fabricator with sponsors. He was a young man with little more than determination, borrowed tools, and a reputation for doing things his own way. The first Gravedigger was an old 1951 Ford pickup, rusted and battered. Hardly the kind of machine you'd expect to become a legend. Dennis threw it together for mud-bogging competitions, fitting it with larger tires and extra power wherever he could find it. The paint? There wasn't any. He spray-painted the words Gravedigger across the side in gray primer. The name was a taunt. Local competitors had newer trucks, shinier parts, and plenty of confidence. Dennis, in his beat-up Ford, told them flatly, "I'll dig your grave with this truck." And with that, Gravedigger was born. The truck wasn't polished. It wasn't even reliable. But it had a soul, and Dennis had a driving style that made people stop what they were doing and watch. He wasn't careful. He wasn't calculating. He drove like he had nothing to lose, like every run might be his last. Fans loved it, because in a world of flashy machines, Gravedigger felt like the truck of the people. It was dirty, dangerous, and unpredictable, just like its driver. As the legend grew, so did the truck. In 1985, Dennis rebuilt Gravedigger into its first true monster truck form, swapping the pickup for a 1951 Ford panel van body and mounting enormous 66-inch tires. That transformation gave the truck the hulking presence it needed to stand alongside the giants of the sport. And then came the paint. The now famous graveyard paint scheme started as an experiment but became the truck's identity. Black base, green flame licks rising up the hood, tombstones and haunted trees painted down the side. The headlights were glowing red, like the eyes of a beast ready to pounce. When Gravedigger rolled into the arena under the lights, it didn't just look like another competitor. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Fans responded instantly. Children painted flames on toy trucks. Teenagers wore homemade Gravedigger shirts. and crowds began chanting its name before it even hit the track. Promoters who once treated Dennis like a filler act suddenly realized his truck was the show. Gravedigger wasn't just a vehicle anymore, it was a character, a villain, a force. And behind the wheel was Dennis Anderson, the underdog who built it with his own two hands. Every time Gravedigger roared to life, fans weren't just watching a truck crush cars, they were watching the impossible made real, a legend in motion. Now, he was the kind of driver who would step into the arena when others declined, when trucks broke down. At local shows, if a monster truck wasn't available, Dennis would step in with Gravedigger, crush cars, make noise, and earn attention. The promoter might not have planned for him, but he made them include him. He began touring more seriously in monster truck circuits by the late 1980s, often racing in TNT motorsports events. Despite being underfunded compared to giants like Bigfoot, Dennis's bold driving earned fan support and media attention. In 1988, he scored a notable victory over Bigfoot in St. Paul, Minnesota, on a televised event. For years, Bigfoot had been the untouchable face of monster trucks. Built by Bob Chandler, it was sleek, well-funded, and backed by sponsors that gave it every advantage. Bigfoot was the corporate giant, the polished professional, the truck that set the standard for everyone else. For fans, Bigfoot wasn't just a machine. It was the mythical king of the arena. The two finally lined up side by side in front of a packed crowd and national television cameras. For Dennis, it was a chance to prove that Gravedigger wasn't just a sideshow act, it was a contender. For Bigfoot, it was just another night, another opponent to crush. The race began, and the contrast was immediate. Bigfoot launched forward with smooth precision, every part of it engineered for victory. Gravedigger roared with raw power, Dennis manhandling the truck over the cars like he was trying to tear through them instead of glide past. And then it happened. Against every odd, Gravedigger crossed the finish line first. The crowd erupted. Viewers at home watched in disbelief as the underdog toppled the sport's reigning giant. Overnight, Dennis Anderson's name went from being whispered in local mud bogs to being shouted in arenas across the country. He wasn't just competing anymore, he was a threat. That win did more than change the scoreboard. It changed the storyline of monster trucks. Fans rallied behind the Gravedigger as if it were their own rebellion on four wheels. Bigfoot represented the system. Shiny, corporate, unbeatable. Gravedigger represented the outsider. Gritty, unpredictable, willing to risk it all. But behind the cheers, the reality was harsher. Dennis was still nearly broke. The truck was battered and fragile, patched up between shows with whatever parts he could find. He admitted later that he sometimes wasn't sure if he had enough money to make it to the next event. That's what made the victory even more powerful, because Gravedigger's survival wasn't guaranteed. Every run could have been its last. Looking back, that 1988 race was more than a win. It was the night Gravedigger became a legend, the night Dennis Anderson went from underdog to icon. And it proved something fans would never forget. In monster trucks, money and polish could win races, but passion and recklessness could make history. By 1989, he introduced Gravedigger 2, switching the truck's body to a 1950 Chevrolet panel van. This body style would become iconic and used in many subsequent Gravediggers. At that time, Dennis's brother Leslie would sometimes drive Gravedigger 1, so the operation was already branching into multiple trucks. When TNT merged into the United States Hot Rod Association in 1991, Anderson joined the formal monster truck circuit. He debuted Gravedigger 3, his first four-link suspension rig, marking a technological leap. In competition, he often took aggressive qualifying passes, destroying obstacles, pushing limits, sometimes sabotaging his own chances of race wins in favor of crowd spectacle. That style both endeared him to fans and drew criticism from the traditionalists. From those humble beginnings, Dennis steadily rose, not just as a monster truck driver, but as a cultural icon. Gravedigger transformed from a backyard mud rig into a symbol of raw power and danger. But every legend has its breaking point, a moment when ambition meets risk and glory flirts with disaster. By the 1990s, monster trucks were no longer just a novelty act at county fairs. The sport was evolving fast, and Dennis was caught in the middle of it. TNT Motorsports, the league where he made his mark, merged with the United States Hot Rod Association in 1991. That merger, and later the rise of Monster Jam under promoters like Clear Channel and Feld Entertainment, changed everything. Suddenly, the sport had national TV coverage, big arenas, and a new kind of audience. families packing stadiums, kids in toy aisles begging their parents for die-cast trucks, and sponsors looking to turn drivers into household names. For Dennis, this was both opportunity and pressure. Gravedigger was already a fan favorite because of its underdog image, but now it had to be bigger, louder, and more reliable to survive on the national stage. He answered with innovation. Gravedigger 3, introduced in 1991, featured a 4-link suspension system that made it one of the most advanced trucks of its time. It wasn't just about brute force anymore, it was about engineering, precision, and pushing the limits of what a monster truck could do. But Dennis never lost his wild streak. Fans knew that when Gravedigger came out, anything could happen. He might win spectacularly, or he might destroy the truck trying. That unpredictability gave him a controversial reputation. Promoters and fellow drivers sometimes called him reckless. His nickname, One Run Anderson, stuck because he was known for going all out in qualifying runs, risking the truck, the win, and sometimes his own body, just to give the crowd a show. For critics, it was proof that Dennis wasn't a disciplined racer. For fans, it was why they loved him. By the mid-90s, Gravedigger wasn't just a truck, it was a franchise. Multiple versions of the truck were built so Dennis and his team could compete in different events across the country at the same time. This move not only expanded the brand but also ensured that no matter where Monster Jam went, there was a Gravedigger there to represent Dennis Anderson's legacy. Still, whenever Dennis himself was behind the wheel, the energy was different. Fans chanted louder, kids waved Gravedigger flags, and rivals braced for a battle. Monster Jam's expansion into massive stadium shows meant bigger ramps, more daring freestyle competitions, and higher expectations. Dennis rose with it. In 1999, he competed in the very first Monster Jam World Finals, an event designed to crown champions on the biggest stage. A year later, in 2000, he cemented his place in history by winning the inaugural World Finals Freestyle Championship. That run was pure Dennis Anderson, fearless, chaotic, and unforgettable. He tore across the course with abandon, hitting jumps at impossible angles and pulling off saves that left the crowd in disbelief. It wasn't clean, but it was electric, and it set the tone for everything Monster Jam would become. That victory gave him validation, but it didn't silence his critics. Some argued that his win was more about showmanship than technical mastery. Others countered that Monster Jam itself had evolved to reward entertainment as much as precision. And in that world, Dennis was king. Rivalries began to define this new era. Gravedigger versus Bigfoot was still iconic, but as Bigfoot's presence in Monster Jam declined, a new rivalry took center stage. Dennis Anderson versus Tom Meents in Maximum Destruction. Where Dennis embodied tradition and mystique with Gravedigger's gothic image, Meents brought chaos and destruction with Max D's spiked armor. Their clashes weren't just races, they were storylines. Fans picked sides, cheering for the legendary Gravedigger or the new underdog challenger. Every time Dennis and Tom lined up, the crowd knew they were about to see something unforgettable. This was the rise of Monster Jam as both a sport and a spectacle. For Dennis, every show was still about the same thing it had always been: proving himself, proving his truck, and proving that no matter how big the stage got, Gravedigger would always be the scariest name in the arena. By the early 2000s, Anderson was no longer just the underdog, he was the standard. The guy who once begged for spots at local shows was now the benchmark everybody chased. He won the Monster Jam World Finals Freestyle Championship in 2000 driving Gravedigger, then followed it with racing titles in 2004, 2006, and 2010. The kid from the Mud-Bogging had become the man who defined what a champion looked like in modern Monster Jam. His name on the lineup meant two things: packed stands and nervous rivals. Yet his style never really smoothed out. Dennis didn't suddenly become conservative just because he was winning trophies. He kept the same edge that first put him on the map. That's how he earned the nickname One Run Anderson. In qualifying or early rounds, he'd often go so hard that he risked wrecking the truck before the main event even started. Some fans loved that mentality. All or nothing, every time. Others, including some inside the industry, quietly wondered if he was costing himself wins by caring more about the show than the scoreboard. That tension, between the underdog trying to blow the roof off and the champion expected to play smart, followed him for the rest of his career. As Monster Jam grew, so did the stakes. Stadiums got bigger, ramps got taller, and the line between amazing and disaster got thinner. Sponsors wanted jaw-dropping moments, TV wanted highlight reels, and fans wanted to see the impossible. To stay at the top, Dennis had to escalate right along with the sport. Gravedigger couldn't just be scary anymore. It had to be spectacular. But that evolution came with a brutal price tag attached to Dennis's body. By the mid-2000s, Dennis had already stacked championships and cemented Gravedigger as Monster Jam's most iconic truck. But under the helmet, he was paying for every wild run. Driving the way he drove wasn't just risky, it was punishing. Over his 35-year career, Anderson endured nearly every injury imaginable. Broken ribs, wrists and ankles, torn muscles, concussions, and the kind of whiplash that would end most drivers' seasons. For Dennis, it barely slowed him down. Beneath the fire suit, pain was constant, but quitting was never an option. On more than one occasion, doctors told him to sit out, to take time off. To heal properly, Dennis pushed back every time. His philosophy was simple. People had bought a ticket to see Gravedigger, and he wasn't going to leave them disappointed. He might limp to the truck, taped up and sore, but once the engine fired, he turned pain into fuel. One infamous incident came in 1991 when Gravedigger crashed violently during a TNT Motorsports event, sending Dennis to the hospital with broken ribs. Instead of taking weeks to recover, he was back behind the wheel almost immediately, bruised and bandaged, insisting that the show had to go on. Fans never saw the ice baths, the sleepless nights, or the way he carefully lowered himself into the seat. They just saw the underdog who refused to stay down. The pattern continued. In 2003, a particularly nasty wreck left him with significant injuries, and again he returned earlier than medical staff recommended. Fellow drivers quietly wondered how long his body could keep absorbing that kind of punishment. Critics said his style was unsustainable, that his refusal to ease up would eventually push him past the breaking point. To some, it wasn't courage anymore, it was stubbornness. And yet, every time Dennis climbed back in, to fans, that resilience only deepened the legend. He seemed almost indestructible, a man who could take crashes that would sideline others and somehow come back even harder. But those closest to him knew the truth. Each wreck left a mark. Each season added another layer of scars. The underdog who once had nothing to lose was now a father, a franchise, and the face of a global brand. Yet he was still driving like the guy who'd spray-painted Gravedigger on a junkyard truck and dared the world to stop him. As Monster Jam entered the 2000s, the freestyle era exploded. Stadium jumps launched trucks over 40 feet into the air. Backflips, once unthinkable, became expected after Tom Meents first proved they could be done. Fans wanted bigger air, wilder saves, and crazier runs. Dennis adapted as best he could. Gravedigger's suspension, chassis, and powertrain were upgraded again and again to survive the new level of mayhem. The green and black truck that started as a backyard project was now a finely tuned missile. Dennis kept pace, but deep down, he knew every jump was a gamble. With every violent landing, every sketchy save, the question grew louder, even if nobody said it out loud. How much longer could his body hold up? The answer came in 2017, when one stunt in Tampa proved that even legends have limits. On January 14, 2017, at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa, Florida, Dennis Anderson lined up Gravedigger for a backflip during a Monster Jam event. It was the kind of move that had become a staple of modern shows. But for a veteran with decades of wear and tear, it was still a huge risk. The truck charged toward the ramp, launched, rotated, and didn't quite make it all the way around. Gravedigger slammed down hard on its roof. The roll cage buckled, the body crumpled, and the impact was vicious. For a moment, the stadium went eerily quiet. Fans watched the replay on the big screens, stunned. Social media lit up within minutes, some posts filled with worry, others with criticism. One headline summed up the mood. Gravedigger flips. Did Dennis Anderson finally push it too far? Medical reports later revealed serious internal injuries, including damage to a main artery in his pancreas. It wasn't just another crash. It was a warning shot from a body that had taken one risk too many. That wreck ended his 2017 season on the spot. Monster Jam announced that Dennis would miss World Finals 18 to recover. Months later, on September 18, 2017, he officially announced his retirement from driving. For many, that crash wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was the moment his bravado finally met its limit. Dennis had always danced with danger. This time, danger answered back and won. Reactions were mixed, but emotional. Some fans mourned the end of an era, feeling like a piece of their childhood had just driven off into the dark. Others nodded with a kind of grim respect. He went out doing exactly what made him famous, pushing a truck further than it was ever meant to go. Critics, meanwhile, used the crash to support what they'd been saying for years. Anderson's aggressive style was never built for longevity. In their eyes, his refusal to scale back eventually cost him the one thing he couldn't replace: his ability to drive. But time has a way of softening criticism and sharpening legacy. Since retiring, Dennis has stayed close to the world he helped build. He remains a powerful presence behind the scenes, mentoring his children, working with the team, and leaning into the Gravedigger brand he created from nothing. He's appeared at events for symbolic moments, final laps, Hall of Fame honors, and fan meet and greets that feel more like reunions than appearances. He doesn't need to strap in to make an arena react anymore. His mere presence does that. Today, more than 40 Gravedigger machines thunder through arenas around the world, each one a moving tribute to Dennis's vision. When the green flames ignite under the stadium lights and that familiar engine note growls through the speakers, it's not just nostalgia. It's proof that one man's backyard experiment outlived the man who drove it. Retirement didn't silence the Anderson name. It multiplied it. Adam, Ryan, Kristen, and Weston turned the family into a dynasty, each carrying a different piece of Dennis's persona. Adam, the composed strategist; Ryan, the wild risk-taker; Kristen, the barrier breaker; Weston, the up-and-comer still carving out his path. Together, they turned Gravedigger from a one-man rebellion into a multi-truck empire. Adam Anderson, in particular, quickly became one of Monster Jam's brightest stars, driving Gravedigger and later his own truck, Megalodon. He blended his father's aggressive flair with a smoother, more technical style. In 2008, he stunned the sport by becoming the youngest driver ever to win the Monster Jam World Finals Racing Championship. It was a clear signal. The Anderson name wasn't just surviving, it was still winning. Ryan Anderson built his own legend behind the wheel of Sonuva Digger, a truck born from the Gravedigger legacy, but stamped with his personality. His highlight reels, packed with wild saves, huge air, and fearless combos, led many fans to call him the modern face of freestyle. Watching Ryan drive felt like watching Dennis's spirit translated into a new era. Same heart, new tricks. Kristen Anderson made history as the first woman to drive Gravedigger, shattering expectations and bringing fresh energy to the brand. For young fans, especially girls who grew up seeing monster trucks as a guy thing, she became proof that the legend could evolve. The truck that once symbolized a lone underdog now represented something bigger: a family, a legacy, and a future where anyone could grab the wheel if they were tough enough. Through it all, Dennis never truly left. Though injuries kept him out of the driver's seat, he shifted his focus to mentoring and supporting from the sidelines. In the pits, he still swapped stories, gave advice, and watched proudly as his kids took the spotlight he once owned. Away from stadiums, he returned to his roots with projects like King Sling, a mud truck that let him play in the dirt again and stay connected to the kind of raw motorsport where he started. Beyond the roar of the shows, Dennis invested in training the next generation at Digger's Dungeon in North Carolina, the same humble base where the original Gravedigger was built. Fans still make pilgrimages there to see early versions of the truck, walk the grounds, and sometimes meet members of the Anderson family. For Dennis, it isn't just a museum, it's a workshop, a proving ground, and a reminder that greatness doesn't have to start in a fancy shop. It can start with scrap metal, busted tools, and a stubborn belief that you can build something that matters. Today, Dennis Anderson is remembered not only as a four-time world champion and Hall of Famer, but as the underdog who turned junk into a legend and a legend into a dynasty. His retirement marked the end of one era, but it also solidified everything he fought for: that a broke kid with a beat-up truck could stand toe-to-toe with the giants and win. For many fans, seeing Adam, Ryan, Kristen, or Weston roll into an arena still feels like watching Dennis's story unfold in real time. Each run is a new chapter, each save a callback to the man who first pointed a junkyard Ford at a stack of cars and hit the throttle. In the end, Dennis Anderson's legacy isn't just painted in green flames on a panel van. It's etched in the roar of the crowd, the loyalty of millions of fans, and the family who turned one man's underdog dream into a multi-generational empire. He didn't just survive in a sport built for giants, he forced the giants to live in his shadow. And every time a Gravedigger engine fires up, somewhere in that thunder, you can still hear the echo of the original underdog, refusing to lift his foot off the gas.